Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and today we got something sweet. So today Tomer is joining me, and we're going to talk about Tomer's top 10 Eldritch Moon cards for Commander. So how you doing today, Tomer?
How's it going, Seth? I'm excited to be here. There's a lot of really good cards to talk about.
Yeah, I am definitely excited for it too. So before we jump into the cards, quick thoughts overall. Do you think Eldritch Moon is a good Commander set? Average? Bad?
Well, the last set has been very good to us, and this set doesn't disappoint either. I think all the colors got at least one or two cards that are really good. Some of them I would say are new format staples, especially in the decks that really want them. So I would say this is an above average set. It's really good for Commander, and people should have their eyes peeled on what they crack open at pre-releases and stuff like that.
Awesome. So Tomer sent me a list, his top 10 list. It's basically his 10 favorite cards, you said, right, Tomer?
It's like roughly ranked in terms of power, but I wanted to focus mostly on just having a spotlight on each type of archetype. I didn't want to focus too much on, for example, Super Friends, which got a bunch of nice cards, because it's only interesting to the people who play Super Friends. So I want to, hit a spot for every little niche. So it's more like that.
Okay, yeah, that sounds like a good plan. And then I added in the rest of the legends basically that weren't on the actual top 10 list because we know that's something Commander players are interested in. So before we get to the actual top 10 list, we're just going to go over the legends of the set briefly, and Tomer can share some thoughts over whether this is a card that's good enough to play as your commander, if it's going to unseat other commanders in the same colors and see some play or not. So let's start with one of the face cards of the set, Emrakul the Promised End. So obviously this one is colorless, Tomer. How
hmm
does Emrakul fit into the world of colorless commanders?
I think she's a really good inclusion in part of the colorless decks, like the Eldrazi focused decks, or just an artifact focused deck like Karn. Typically, the colorless decks are led by the original Eldrazi, Kozilek or Ulamog. The original versions, like Kozilek Butcher of Truth, for example, draws you four cards and he has annihilated four. The new Eldrazi lords are also quite good, and Emrakul, I would say, is good in the 99 for that. I don't really see it as a commander so much because the ability doesn't really get you out of a jam. It just really messes up your opponents. So it's a really good ability, but it's probably not something you want in your command zone, I would say.
All right, so our next legend might be something you'd play in a zombie deck, I guess. Gisa and Geralf. So is this something that could be a commander in blue black zombies, or are there just better options out there already if that's your tribe and your colors?
I would say personally that they're not going to auto replace any of the zombie lords because we have a lot of really good ones, but they have a very specific niche, and that's what's really interesting about them. For example, Grimgrin Corpseborn is oftentimes the most popular blue black zombie leader because he's a repeatable and free sacrifice outlet. So he enables a lot of cool combos. Usually it involves Blood Artists and a Grave Crawler and just infinitely sacrificing the creature and comboing off that way. And then there's Thraxon Mundar, who adds red to the color mix, and he's just a really good Voltron or just raw power commander. And then there's, for example, Sidisi, who's probably the best self-milled general. But the thing that Gisa and Geralf, I don't know how to say that. The way that G&G work out is that they offer raw card advantage to your deck. That's the really interesting part. No other zombie commander really does that. So if you're going for just a more controlling zombie deck that tries to win by grinding out your opponents with raw card advantage, I think Gisa and Geralf are probably the best ones. And also by a lore perspective, if you want to choose, if you want to stick mostly to the lore between like Grimgrin and G&G, I'd probably go for G&G.
Is it something you would consider playing in the 99 in a blue black? If you keep Grimgrin as your commander, let's say, is this something you just play for value in that deck in the 99?
Yeah, absolutely. Because they do the two things that every single zombie deck, tribal zombie deck wants to do. The first thing they want to do is they want to put zombies in their graveyard for reanimation purposes. And the second thing they want to do is they want to cast zombies from the graveyard. And these guys do both of them, both of those two things. And anything else is just like additional more niche strategies. This is a generic strategy that every single zombie deck wants to do, and this is what they do very well and very efficiently for just 4 mana. I think the only downside is they don't have the zombie creature type themselves, so they lack synergies with stuff like Zombie Apocalypse, which returns all zombies from the graveyard to the battlefield, or Rooftop Storm, which lets you cast zombie spells for free. But other than that, that's kind of like a nitpicky issue. They offer so much for the deck that it's really a really good inclusion.
Oddly enough, they would actually die to the zombie apocalypse, wouldn't they? The zombies
Yeah.
turn on them and actually kill them.
I think it's for the greater good, or it's probably a fitting end for them, considering their workday.
All right, our next legend is mono white stacks a thing, Tomer. Thalia, Heretic, Cathar. What do you think about this one?
I think she is an interesting general. I don't know if she would be the leader of a deck, but she definitely could be. Basically, she's like a mini Loxodon gatekeeper, where she just slows down your opponents, like the creatures and the non-basic lands, which in Commander there's a lot of them usually. They enter the battlefield tapped, and then you can add to that slowness by running cards like Static Orb and Winter Orb. So yeah, she is definitely the potential for a very good stacks general. I can't even think of any other one that would be good in mono white for stacks. I think maybe Hirobi the Duskwalker or something like that. The one that messes up with opponents untapping lands. That's the only other one that I can think of that is a stacks mono white general. So I think she has potential as taking up the mantle for that.
Second question about Thalia. Is this something you would play in like a Bant stacks list, something with stasis and that type of thing? Like, would you add this as another lock piece to a multicolor stacks deck?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if a deck like the Revi Imperial Tactician, which generally goes for the stacks route as well, if they need another lockdown piece, then Thalia is a really good option for it. She's only 3 mana, so she's not too expensive for what you want out of it, and she puts the most relevant things into the battlefield tap, because non-basic lands are played very often, even in monocolor decks, because there's a lot of utility lands that are running Commander, and creatures are often the most popular way of winning the game. So having them come into play tap 2 is a good way to just keep your forces unblocked with the Revi's case.
All right, Tomer. So you've been waiting what, a few years for a werewolf commander,
Yes.
and Eldritch Moon has finally given us a werewolf commander. So what do you think, Tomer? Are you thrilled that you finally got the commander you've been waiting for?
Seth, I was so excited. I was so excited for this, but it's a little bit disappointing. I'll say that. That's a little bit of an understatement. But Ulrich, ah, he's so safe. Like, I imagine that when design was shipping off Eldritch Moon, like they were the night before, they were celebrating. They said, guys, tomorrow morning we're sending it off to the printer. We're sending off like commission work for the artwork and everything. Finally done. And then somebody offhandedly remarked, did we make a legendary werewolf commander? Because, in Innistrad people wanted that, right? And then they just were like in emergency mode. Guys, we have to make something like right away. Let's make it super safe. We have no time to play test it. All right, 4/4 for 5 mana. Okay, that sounds great. Maybe make an 8/8 when it flips. No. That might be good. Make it 6/6. Does it have trample? No. That would be too good. Like, just it even from a a lore perspective, he's not really interesting. He's an uncontested alpha, and we saw in Innistrad, uncontested alphas mean he fights other werewolves for supremacy, like Alpha Brawl. We saw that in a card, but he fights non-werewolves. And then we're waiting for like tribal support, but he doesn't do anything for werewolves. And it's so frustrating, Seth. And you know what the worst thing is? We have a amazing legendary werewolf. Amazing, and it does exactly what we want it to do, but it's not a legendary creature. It's called Yare Reach Bandit. And what it does is at the beginning of your upkeep, whenever a werewolf enters the battlefield under your control, you may transform it. Now that is an amazing ability for werewolves. That's what would have just allowed werewolves to function well in multiplayer where they actually struggle. That's their biggest downside. And it fixes that. Garrett fixes that. Why couldn't that be Ulrich? Like, just make that the legendary. You had it, Wizards. Like, it was right there. You made it.
So I think I might know the answer to this, but in your werewolf deck, are you going to play this as your commander? Or are you going to stick to something else that's red and green?
If I wanted to make a good werewolf deck, I wouldn't run Ulrich on it. But if I want to just stick with werewolves and stick with the theme, then yeah, I'll run it grudgingly. I'm going to be sad every time I see him, every time I cast him. But you know what? He has the werewolf tag, so I'll grudgingly accept it. And then maybe in 5 years from now, when we come back to Innistrad, maybe then we'll get, a decent werewolf. Maybe they'll get it right in the span of 10 years.
I was going to say that because apparently Marrow came out and said that we would likely return to Innistrad a third time, so they get another shot at making... one last question. Would you be happier if they just didn't print a legendary werewolf? Like, is it that bad that...
Well, okay, so the sad part is that Ulrich is one of the better werewolves, which is how good I think werewolves are in Commander at this moment. So, you know what? I'm happy we got something. It's just incredibly disappointing that this is what they've chosen for our legendary, especially when we had something that was absolutely the perfect fit for werewolves and they actually printed it.
Well, ironically, we got a legendary spider as well. And the legendary spider, which, as you know, everyone has been waiting for years and years, is way better than the legendary werewolf. My first question was, is green-black spiders an actual thing? Like, can you make a tribal spider deck now?
Well, I agree she's really sweet. I didn't do much research on tribal spiders, but my gut feeling is there isn't too much spider matter support other than Ishkana, obviously. So there's a lot of spiders. Most of them are crappy vanilla creatures from like Ice Age and stuff like that. So there should be enough to make a deck, but is there enough support for spiders? I would probably say no. It probably wouldn't be very interesting. But Ishkana is definitely a very good start to a tribe. Maybe and hopefully they expand upon it in like a future set, and then we can actually do a proper spider tribal deck. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there is enough support right now out there. I've just never had the inclination to build a spider because they're really creepy. But
so second question is, disregarding tribal synergies, is there a reason to play this as your Golgari commander?
I think so. First of all, if you really want to creep out your opponents, then Ishkana fits the bill. First of all, super creepy artwork. She's a spider. And even her delirium ability, where she enters the battlefield with extra spiders crawling around, is really, really, really thematic and really creepy. So bonus points for anybody who runs Ishkana, because I would probably want to use red decks and burn it all.
All right, so that has been our honorable mention discussion of the legends. Now we're moving on to the actual top 10 list. So number 10 on Tomer's list of favorite commander cards from Eldritch Moon, we have a white card in Collective Effort. So this is an escalate card, pretty interesting, has multiple options you can choose, and to pay the extra escalate cost, you have to tap an untap creature you control. So Tomer, what do you think about this one in Commander?
Well, I think white has a lot of options for removal. They're probably the best color for removal. So the bar is pretty high for whenever you see a new removal card to see if it will actually fit your deck or not. And I think collective effort is good enough that it will fit in many white decks, actually. Any creature-centric white deck, especially tokens, which is one of white's specialties. The first two modes of collective effort, the store target creature with power of 4 or greater, and the store target enchantment, that's relevant almost always in multiplayer, just because there's so many variety of powerful threats on the board. It could be a creature, it could be an enchantment, it could be an artifact. You're always going to have two good targets, and you're usually going to have at least one creature on the board. So right off the bat, you can get two modes that are highly relevant in multiplayer for just 3 mana. And then if you're in a go wide strategy like tokens, which white usually does end up being, you could use all 3 modes and tap down just 3 1/1 tokens out of your 10 or so, and you've got an amazing value for just 3 mana. So I think basically any white deck that has just some amount of creatures will be interested in collective effort, and then it's probably an auto include in token decks because they can make use of all 3 modes very easily.
Yeah, it seems like if you're a token deck that's going wide, it's going to be super easy to activate all 3 modes by tapping down some random creatures you have around. And that's you're getting a lot of value for that mana cost. For 3 mana, antheming your entire team and hitting an enchantment and destroying a creature, you're probably getting like at least 6 mana. If like you looked at those cards separately, it's probably at least like 6 mana worth of card that you get just for tapping those creatures. So I like this one as well. Moving on to number 9 on our list, we are heading into the world of black cards and a vampire, Voldaren Pariah. So this is our first flip card and also our first madness card. So Tomer, what do you think about this one?
So I was really excited for Voldaren Pariah because we've seen a lot of discard outlets that are quite good, but we weren't seeing a lot of madness cards that would go with those discard outlets. And generally, you want more madness cards than you have discard outlets. If you have one repeatable discard outlet, you're pretty much good. So I was really waiting a long time for a vampire that had a really good ability and was capable to be cast with madness. And here we go. Voldaren Pariah is probably the very best one. Being able to cause an opponent to sacrifice 3 creatures is a huge deal in Commander. It could just board wipe somebody. And in the vampire deck and in black in general, it's pretty easy to sacrifice 3 other creatures. In just tribal vampires itself, it could be enabled by cards like Bloodline Keeper, which taps to make a 2/2 vampire token each turn. There's also Pawn of Ulamog. Whenever a non-token creature you control is put in the graveyard, then you put a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi token in the battlefield. And then in Shadows over Innistrad, we saw Color the Bloodline, which is probably the best combination with the Pariah. If you pay 1 and discard a card, you put a 1/1 black Vampire Knight token with lifelink into the battlefield. So first of all, you can discard the Pariah to cast her for her madness cost. Then you can use the tokens you generated to flip her over. And then you have a 6/5 flyer, and your opponent just lost 3 creatures. So I think it's really solid.
So I can't think of the name of this card, and maybe I'm completely misremembering this, but isn't there a vampire that works sort of like a Grave Pact?
Yes. Oh, yes. It is like a flying grave pact. It was from like Zendikar block.
Yeah. I wanted to say Anwan the Ruin Sage, but that's the other one. That's the one that makes people sack on their upkeep.
I think it was Butcher of Malakir.
Ah, yes, but that's some pretty sweet synergy because then you're actually wiping 3 creatures from everyone when you sack your creatures to flip, and then you still get to make whoever had the most creatures likely out of your opponents sacrifice 3 more creatures. So you could turn that into a pretty much an almost one-sided board wipe, and you're going to end up having a 6/5 flyer plus the Butcher of Malakir left over. So it seems like you could do some really cool stuff with it if you build around it a little bit.
I didn't even think of that. That is brutal. And obviously, Butcher of Malakir is probably going to be an auto include in almost every vampire tribal deck. So this is very, very easy to accomplish. Like, yeah, that's some really nice synergies, actually. Good call.
All right, moving on to number 8 on our list. I'm really curious to hear what you have to say about this. We have another white card. I don't think it fits into the decks we were talking about with the collective effort. This is Deploy the Gatewatch. So the collected company for Planeswalkers, essentially.
Yep.
Where does this fit in Commander, Tomer?
So there's only one real home for this, but I wanted to give a shout out to my best friends, the Super Friends. It is, as you said, it's essentially collected company. Another example would be See the Unwritten, where you look at the top 8 cards, and then you can put up to 2 creature cards among them onto the battlefield. So it's not only card advantage, because if you do it right, you will get 2 planeswalkers out of it for 1 card. It also is mana efficient, because most of the planeswalkers are at least 3 mana, usually 4 or 5. So if you're paying 6 mana to get like a 9 mana investment on the field, and like 2 of them total, it's really good value. I think every single Super Friend list will want this in the deck. And also there's a lot of ways to manipulate your top deck to make sure you hit 2 planeswalkers. Cards like Scroll Rack, Brainstorm, and Sylvan Library are all pretty much Commander staples. So it's not going to be too hard to make sure you always hit 2 planeswalkers with this card.
So this is one, and I think you're right, it seems really powerful in Super Friends. My word of warning would be, if you're building a deck and you have 5 planeswalkers in it, 7 planeswalkers, you probably want to leave this out. I think you really got to be getting... I know someone ran the numbers in Constructed, and to reliably hit 2, you got to be up to around 17 to like 21 planeswalkers in a 60 card deck. So I'm assuming you're going to want at least 20 planeswalkers in your deck, unless you have a lot of ways of manipulating your library, like the scroll racks and things like that. But you're going to want a critical mass of planeswalkers, I think, before you put this in your commander deck.
Yeah, absolutely. This is not something you're going to jam in to any deck, but the Super Friends list, at least the ones that I'm thinking of, they generally run like 25, 30, or sometimes even more if they're really hardcore about it. So it will fit there. And then plus, you should definitely be running some top deck manipulation. Cards like Vampiric Tutor, which puts any card on from your library on top of your library. Those help immensely. Sylvan Library again, Brainstorm again, all these different ways to just ensure that you hit it, because blanking on Deploy the Gatewatch would probably be the worst feeling in the world. So,
on the other hand, if you can set it up with a Vampiric Tutor or something to hit 1 Ugin even, you're still getting your mana's worth if you can hit 1 really big expensive planeswalker. So,
and then of course if you're going big, you get like Ugin plus Karn.
Oh, with a doubling season on the battlefield.
Yeah, Ugin plus Nicol Bolas, just. And then everybody groans.
Yup.
Fantastic.
All right, moving on to number 7. Oh, I really love this card. When we were doing our constructed set review, I said this might be the best blue removal spell they've ever printed, and it reminds me of a commander staple in green, Song of the Dryad. This is Imprisoned in the Moon. So, Tomer, what do you think about this one?
Well, first off, I find it very strange that blue gets this card, because it feels like something they shouldn't be getting, like turn your opponent's stuff into lands. That seems odd. I really want to hear Mark Rosewater's thoughts on these, because I feel like he was probably not happy with this card once it actually got pushed through. It's also, it joins the ranks of other really great odd blue removal, Pongify, Rapid Hybridization, and now this. These are probably now blue staples, I would say. I would jam this into pretty much any blue deck that wants some removal. And your analogy of Song of the Dryad is really, really spot on. I think Song of the Dryad is a little bit better because it can hit any permanent, including enchantments and artifacts, which Imprison the Mood cannot. But it's still Imprisoned in the Moon can still hit the most important target, and that is hitting opposing commanders. It effectively destroys the commander, but it notably doesn't let them go back to the command zone to be recast. So they're kind of just stuck as this crappy land, and I think that's just the best way of getting rid of problematic commanders. You destroy them, but you don't let them get recast. So they're just stuck there until the person can actually deal with the enchantment itself.
So this is just a straight up staple, you think? If you're playing a blue deck, you're most likely going to be playing this?
Yeah, I think so. I still think Rapid Hybridization and Pongify are my top two, just because they're one mana and instant speed, and that's just so flexible. But if I was searching for a third removal in blue, it would definitely be Imprison in the Moon. And for most decks, I would want at least three removal. So
Well, moving on to number 6 on our list, we're heading back to the black cards. Actually, this was my spoiler card. Another zombie. We have Crypt Breaker. So, Tomer, what do you think of the zombie heritage druid, maybe?
well, I one of my favorite decks that I have a paper version of is Tribal Zombies, and I'm very critical of the zombies that get spoilered, but this one made me so happy because we almost never see an early drop zombie that has good commander implications, but this Crypt Breaker does exactly what a tribal zombie wants to do for an early drop. Early game, it helps you fill your graveyard with zombies by just discarding cards, and it makes tokens, so it starts building up a board presence for you to do more zombie synergies. And then later on, when it's late game and a 1/1 creature for one isn't going to be doing too much and you don't really want to be discarding cards, well, now you get to start drawing cards off him. Just one a turn, and immediately as soon as you cast him, just for 1 mana. It's amazing. It's so flexible. Ah, it's great.
Yeah, I really like this card too. I figured you would because it says draw a card on it, but it is rare that you see a one drop that is awesome on turn 1 and also pretty good if you cast it on turn 7 or turn 8 because you're immediately drawing those cards. And in Commander, when you have 40 life, paying a life to draw a card, that's really not a big deal. Black decks do that all the time, so the
Yep.
life loss is just negligible. So I think this card is sweet. Is this definitely in your zombie deck you were talking about then, Tomer?
Yeah, it's an auto include, I would say. It's versatile and offers relevancy throughout the match. It's good early game, it's good middle game, it's good late game. It's just always good. It's amazing.
All right, we're heading to the top 5, and we have a little bit of weirdness because we're going to talk about some meld pairs. So instead of just one card, we actually have 3 cards combined. The first one is the white meld pair. So we get Gisa the Broken Blade, a 4/3 flying first strike lifelink, and then we also have Bruna, the Fading Light, a big 5/7 that reanimates a human or angel when it enters the battlefield. And then, of course, they flip around into Bracella, a 9/10 that does a whole bunch of stuff and is basically unbeatable. So, Tomer, what do you think of this pair in Commander?
I think just by looking at the card, it's so exciting. And I think Wizards really nailed the meld cards just in terms of just the impact, the wow factor of it. I showed it to some friends who haven't played Magic in a long time, and they're like, this is so cool. I really want to play Eldritch Moon now, and I really want to get these cards. So just the wow factor right off the bat, A plus for me. And then playability, it's kind of a struggle to get Rosella on the board, but it's so worth it at the same time. I think both individually, Gisela the Broken Blade and Bruna the Fading Light, both of them are solid angels. I would imagine they see play in angel tribal decks or just in mono white decks in general. They're just really solid creatures at what they do. And then combined, oof, flying, first strike, vigilance, lifelink, 9/10 body, and your opponents can't cast spells with converted mana cost 3 or less. Not only does that mess up your opponent's game plans, but it also blanks almost all targeted removal on Brazil that's popular. So there's no rapid hybridization on it. There's no path to exile on it. You're going to have to get a board wipe. And if you pair that with something like Avacyn or some indestructibility, well, Rosella is going to knock some faces around.
Yeah, and in Commander, I was a little skeptical of these in Constructed because they're both legendary, and you don't really want to run four of these in your standard deck. But in Commander, you're playing one ofs anyway, plus you have tons of powerful tutors. So it
Mhm.
seems like there's a lot of ways. If your goal is to meld into Bracella, you're going to be able to figure out a way to do it. Plus, you can always use the Bruna to reanimate the Gisela and get the meld that way. So I don't think it should be that hard to do in the right build in Commander, just because there's so many ways to search out what you need from your deck or get it into your graveyard to reanimate it. Well, not all meld pairs are expensive, and number 4 on our list, we have a really aggressively costed meld pair. This is Hanweir Garrison, a 3-mana 2/3 that makes some tokens when it attacks, and then we have Hanweir Battlements, a land that can tap to give something haste as long as you pay a red mana while you're tapping it. And then if you pay 5, you can meld those two cards together into Hanweir the Writhing Township, which also seems pretty unbeatable. 7/4 makes 2/3/2s that are attacking. Whenever it attacks, it has trample, it has haste. So what do you think of this pair in Commander, Tomer?
So what interests me so much about this pairing is that both these cards individually are good enough that melding is kind of like an afterthought for me. It's amazing afterthought, but they're so good that they can stand alone without the meld shenanigans in general. Hanweir Garrison, I think it's basically like a mini hero of Bladehold. It attacks, it puts 2 tokens immediately, so for a 3-mana investment, each time you're attacking, you're making 2 tokens a turn. That's already quite good, and mono red decks or mono red token decks, Boros token decks will like this just as a really efficient token generator, just avoiding anything else. Perforos, God of the Forge, deals 2 damage to each opponent when a creature enters the battlefield under your control. So you're dealing 4 damage to each opponent every turn you swing with the garrison. The Boros tokens, just like Iroas, God of Victory, and others, will really like this. It's really just powerful, and also my Zedru deck loves token generators, so you can just donate them away. So it's a really strong card by itself. And then Hanweir Battlements is a fantastic haste enabler. All other things aside, we've seen 2 other haste enablers as lands, Hall of the Bandit Lord and Flamekin Village. But the problem is that they usually come into play tapped. Hanweir Battlements, you can tap for mana the turn it comes into play. It's colorless, but it's still quite good. And paying 2 mana to Gisling Haste is really good as well.
I could imagine this being a huge blowout in the Narset deck that you played. So, giving Narset haste is super powerful if you're playing a competitive like combo build of Narset. But one other thing I noticed when you were playing that deck is you had, was it Hall of the Bandit Lord?
Yep.
And everyone kind of saw that coming. You could see it because it enters the battlefield tab, so we would fight really hard to counter your Narset or do something to keep your Narset off the battlefield, kill it, even though it's really hard to do. But with this, you can potentially play your Narset, have this in your hand, drop this, and give your Narset haste out of nowhere, and then usually if you get in one attack, you can combo off and win the game. So I like the surprise element of this that you don't get with the other haste granting lands in Commander.
Yeah, exactly. Just the fact that it comes into play untapped puts so much potential, either surprise potential or just smooths out your casting of the early turns. I really like this over Flamekin Village, especially if you're not running an elemental deck and you can't just reveal an elemental to let it come into play untapped. Hall of the Bandit Lord is an exceptionally good because you don't have to pay extra mana to give something haste. It actually just taps for mana that gives whatever it has haste. So Battlements costs a little bit more if you're trying to use it for the haste ability, but it comes with play untapped, which is amazing, and it has that surprise factor, and this is really good. And then melding the two, you have a 7/4 trample haste It makes 2 tokens immediately. It's swinging for 13 damage. Even if you get rid of the thing immediately, you still have 2 tokens into play. And then each other turn that it gets to swing, you're making 2 more. You're adding 6 more power to the board. Oh, it's so good.
Yeah, I like too. You can do some cool things with dividing up the attack. So if you can send the Hanweir Writhing Township at someone that doesn't have a good block, but then
Mhm.
you could potentially throw the 3/2s at someone who has a planeswalker, a different player that you might not want to throw your Hanweir Writhing Township at because that player could block and kill it. So I like that aspect of it too, that you can kind of split up where the attackers go and potentially get some more value out of it that way in a multiplayer game.
Yeah, absolutely. Being able to divide up your damage is pretty crucial. Like, if, for example, you want to get rid of a planeswalker, but it has a giant blocker, well, then you send your 2 tokens, like you said, and it will kill the planeswalker while your Hanweir Writhing Township is going to stay alive. And just like both of these cards are very, very good by themselves. And then you have Hanweir, the Writhing Township to meld as just like a beautiful finisher at the end of it. Ooh, it's fantastic for red decks. This is probably like the best gift I've seen for red decks in a while.
Sweet. Well, moving into the top three, up next we have a card that's definitely not going in any red decks. We have a Planeswalker, Tamiyo Field Researcher. So, Tomer, what are the applications of Tamiyo in Commander?
So I said I didn't want to hit on the same archetype more than once. I'm making an exception here because Tamiyo fits in more than one deck, but the most obvious inclusion for Tamiyo is definitely Super Friends. So the nice thing about Super Friends is that it's always set up to protect your planeswalkers, and generally the planeswalkers you do choose are ones that can make creature tokens that can protect themselves with. So Tamiyo's +1 ability synergizes very well with other planeswalkers. You just choose 2 of the creature tokens that you made with your other planeswalkers, and then have them draw 2 cards for you. It's fantastic. But obviously, the biggest draw of her is the fact that her ultimate is an Ancestral Recall plus Omniscience. And it just so happens, who would have thought that if you have Doubling Season out, which is a staple in every single Super Friends deck since the dawn of time, you get to ultimate her immediately. And then, oh, by the way, she gets to survive that too, because why not?
Yeah, 4 mana Omniscience is just so insane.
Four mana Omniscience plus here's 3 extra cards to play with. Just because yeah, sure. Like it could have been just Omniscience, and that would have been ridiculous. But also here's 3 extra cards. And oh, by the way, she's gonna survive that too, so you can start +1ing her afterwards. Because yeah, sure, this is fine.
I mean, it's Tamiyo, the ultimate, isn't one of the ultimates that just literally wins the game on the spot, but I have a hard time imagining a way to lose the game after you actually ultimate a Tamiyo. With those 3 cards, you're drawing more action, probably more planeswalkers to play into your doubling season, and it is very, very strong.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the only way you're going to be losing is if you hit every single land from then on. But other than that, in a typical game, a typical draw, that's going to close out the game pretty easily. And having doubling season out in a deck that always wants doubling season out isn't a far cry, I would say. Also, she has potential in another type of deck, at least one that I was thinking of, and that is the Revi Imperial Tactician. The Revi loves flooding the board with small little creatures, small utility creatures like Mana Dorks, Llanowar Elves, or just Aven Mind Sensor, those type of like Staxy cards. They want to lock down the deck, lock down your opponent's decks while still functioning on their own. And Tamiyo actually fits really well with this playstyle, like a stasis type of playstyle. You just attack with your mana dorks that you've been playing anyway, and you draw cards off them. It works really well. And if there's anything that hasn't been tapped down that you want locked down with cards like Stasis, well, then you have your -2 ability. You just tap those things down, and you open up your spot for blockers. Or you just amazing.
Imagine how many cards you could draw if you also had an Edric on the battlefield.
Oh my. Well, that's obvious, right? You have to have Edric in the Revy. That's fair. So next time there's a viewer submitted decks, if you make the Revy, it might just happen that it'll be picked. I don't know.
All right, number 2 on our list. We're getting to the end. I really want to hear what you have to say about this card in Commander, because when we did the constructed set review, I picked this as my favorite card in the entire set. Number 2, Splendid Reclamation.
Well, this card is bonkers. I wouldn't say it's like an auto green staple, but in the decks that want this is the best card that's ever been printed for them. I'm thinking decks that are like the Lands Matter decks. These are the Gitrog Monster, Omnath Locus of Rage, and Titania Protector of Argoth in general. These are the decks that play cards like Life from Loam. They dredge, they self-mill their library into the graveyard, and they have a whole bunch of lands in the graveyard at any given moment. And Splendid Reclamation in those decks is absurd. For only 4 mana, you return not just all your basic lands. No. You get to return all your land cards from the graveyard to the battlefield tapped. The only downside is it comes into play tapped. That's not really a downside. In a deck that cares about putting lands in your graveyard, and any deck in general has lots of fetch lands, so you're automatically putting your fetch lands in the graveyard. Gitrog Monster likes doing stuff like Golgari Grave Troll and just dredging it up so he can draw cards off each land that is milled. Omnath Locus of Rage, again, loves landfall, so just all the fetch lands, all of like just those type of effects are amazing. Titania Priestess, Protector of Argoth, specifically likes it when you put lands from the battlefield to the graveyard. So all these abilities put so many lands in the graveyard, and then Splendid Reclamation just brings them all back. It's dirty. It's really dirty.
Yeah, I think this card is even just good as a ramp card. If you think about what 4 mana gets you for ramp, you're thinking like Explosive Vegetation, maybe. You're getting 2 lands out of your deck onto the battlefield. It seems like you should very consistently be able to Explosive Vegetation. I mean, maybe it doesn't fit in budget, but if you're playing fetch lands even, it's pretty easy to get 2 lands of ramp out of this card. And it's very realistic if you're playing a deck that's built around stocking your graveyard with dredge cards or with other effects. You're going to be ramping from 4 to 10 lands, maybe 12.
Yeah.
Like, you can ramp so much with this card. It's just really insane. And it's another one of those cards that I have a hard time believing they printed it as it is. Like, it just seems so powerful. And like you said, it's not for every deck, but I think it goes in more decks than it might appear at first glance. I can imagine decks that aren't wholly dedicated to dredging playing this just as a really good ramp card at 4 if you build around it just a little bit.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, because especially if we're not focusing on the budget aspect, a deck with lots of fetch lands is pretty typical in Commander, just because fetch lands happen to be the best lands you can be running along with like the original duels and stuff. So yeah, if you just have 2 fetch lands cast before you use Splendid Reclamation, that is an Explosive Vegetation. It's actually even better because your fetch lands can then get dual lands, which Explosive Vegetation only gets basics. So yeah, even in decks that aren't dedicated to the land strategy, we'll probably want to be at least looking at Splendid Reclamation. And yeah, I'm also a little bit in shock that this was printed. At the very least, it should have said return all basic lands, because then those decks that are interested in this card, at least they have to work a little bit for this to work. But no, this is all lands. Oh, here's your strip mine back. Here's your here's all your duels. Here's your fetches.
And the other thing is, there's been cards like this in the past that either did only basics or did it for everyone. This also works with like Armageddon. If you can like get to 8 mana, float mana for this Armageddon, kill all your opponent's stuff, then just get all your lands back.
Oh, that is dirty.
So dirty.
So when are you going to be trying that strategy out, Seth?
When does Eldritch Moon release on Magic Online?
I'll tune in for Commander Clash.
Well, number 1 on our list is also a green card, and also a card I can't believe that Wizards printed. We have Eldritch Evolution, a card that not only tutors but also cheats on mana. What are your thoughts on this one, Tomer?
So this is the card I would say is not only the most powerful card in the entire set for Commander and possibly other sets too. I'm not too familiar with other formats, but in Commander, definitely the most powerful, I would say. And I would also say it's a staple in every green deck because turns out most green decks run creatures. They end up being very good, and Eldritch Evolution just rewards you for playing good cards. So Eldritch Evolution is essentially a slightly more fair version of Natural Order, and I say that very loosely fair, which is also one of the most powerful green cards in the entire format. You can't swap your mana dork, your like Llanowar elves, into a Craterhoof Behemoth, but you don't have that green creature restriction, so you can fetch you can sacrifice any creature, and you can get any creature regardless of its color. And you're also tutoring for a creature with a higher converted mana cost, up to 2 more specifically. So you are getting it's pretty mana efficient if you're starting to sacrifice like higher cost creatures. And yeah, it is one of the most powerful creature tutors, one of the most powerful tutors, one of the most powerful cards we've seen in a very, very, very long time. And I think this is going to be a staple in every single green deck that runs creatures, and that's pretty much all of them.
So get your copies of Eldritch Evolution now if you're playing Commander or probably any format. My thoughts on this card is to the point where I could see it getting banned in a format like Modern. It is just really bonkers, and I figured I might as well ask you that. Is this something to that level where you could see it getting banned in Commander, or is it just a good value card? Because in Modern it's really dangerous because it can really efficiently put together infinite game-winning combos that people are already playing in their deck. Is it like that in Commander or not? Is that scary?
It's hard to say. It's one of the best tutors, but I don't think the rules committee ever bans highly efficient tutors. I think they only banned a couple like Tinker for just really, really, really abusive turn 1 combos. But I don't think Eldritch Evolution actually goes that far. I think it's just a staple, and it's probably not going to get banned. It's just really, really good value.
Well, I'm excited to test it out. So I think it'll be a fun card to play and a super powerful card.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, that is our top 10 cards from Eldritch Moon. Tomer, do you have any final thoughts on anything on the way out the door?
Well, I love the meld mechanic. I'm really excited to actually run Brizella in Commander, which was the first time I said that for Mono White in a very, very long time. I'm really happy with the mechanics. I think we got a really good haul, so I'm just excited. I'm really excited for going to the pre-release, hopefully picking up a Crypt Breaker, hopefully picking up an Eldritch Evolution, and just jamming it into my deck. So I'm really happy overall with the stuff we got, except for Ulrich. But yeah. They can't all be winners.
Yeah, that is true. But luckily we had a lot of winners in the set,
Yeah.
so maybe that at least a little bit makes up for the disappointing Werewolf Legend.
It softens the pain, definitely.
Anyway, Tomer, thanks so much for hanging out and doing this. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks for having me. This was great.
Yeah, and thanks to everyone else for tuning in. So that's been our Eldritch Moon top 10 cards for Commander, and we will be back next time to do it again. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll talk to you soon.